So thank you everyone for coming to my virtual talk today. It's a bit strange coming to you all the way from New Zealand, talking to my computer as part of this recording, but hopefully you find this interesting and get something out of it. It's slightly different from perhaps more standard consumer insight pieces that certainly I've worked on previously. I've been at Beef and Lamb for a couple of years now, and talking about agriculture and animals and things that grow in the dirt was a bit of a change for me. And so, yeah, away from consumer packaged goods and that sort of thing. This study is all about how we talk about or sell the concept of regenerative agriculture to consumers as a new way of farming. Well, it's a new old way of farming, I should say. But it's quite focused on soil, quite focused on dirt, and leading to the things that we enjoy and the products that are grown. So it will take some perceptual shifts for consumers if they're going to be able to engage with it. It's not the first time that I have tried to sell a story around the environment or around sustainable production. Back in 2009, I worked on a project with AB InBev, who at the time owned Stella Artois, sort of vying with Heineken for the biggest global beer brand in the world. And they were coming up with this pretty cool campaign developed by Mother, a pretty painfully cool agency in London at the time, that was talking about how all of their talking about the sustainability credentials through the fact that the cans were made with 50% recycled aluminium, the cardboard boxes were recycled. They had something what they called a hedge fund, that if you bought a box of Stella Artois, they'd plant a hedgerow in the English countryside because these were in decline across the UK at the time. I'm not sure if there are more hedges there now, but at the time they were in decline. And they threw the resources of this pretty cool top London agency at this problem of sustainability. I think they ran it for a while, but it was pretty heavy going. When you're and predominantly these are young guys in the UK drinking these beers. I know it's a global brand, but we were focusing on the UK. You're not really thinking about whether the can you're drinking from is recycled. You're wanting to have a good time with your mates, probably wanting to get drunk. And Stella Artois was renowned for being quite a strong beer, referred to as wife beater, because you would drink it and get out of control. I think more refined on the continent than in the UK. But you weren't really thinking about whether your box was recycled and whether your cans were recycled, even if it was made out of a pretty cool citron being lent on by a French guy. You were more concerned about the contents, about whether it was facilitating a good time with your mates, that it tastes palatable enough when it was cold to drink, not really about its environmental credentials. And things haven't changed much with this over time. This is for purchase drivers for food. This is US data. But, things haven't changed a lot. People still put price, taste, whether the food is healthy, is it convenient enough for me to grab from the burger stand above of environmental credentials and environmental sustainability. So I think when you talk to consumers and pre-doing the study, all the data says, yes, it's important. Yes, the environment and sustainability is important. It's just not as important as a lot of other stuff that I consider when I'm buying food. The guy that ran this work for us in the US would often say, no one sits down after a delicious meal and goes, boy, that was sustainable, wasn't it? No, they go, it tasted great, or I feel good after eating it. Or usually it's really predominantly focused on taste, or actually the wider eating experience. Did I enjoy it? with friends? Is it a pleasant setting if you're eating out or even in your house? Not whether it's environmentally sustainable and the credentials. A little bit closer to home, for me, we export around probably close. It's in the 90s for, it varies a little bit, about 90% of beef and lamb grown in New Zealand is exported. So we are pretty conscious of what our export markets think. And UK lamb consumers are a bit of a stalwart for us. New Zealand lamb, we've been exporting to the UK for many, many years, and a lot of consumers like it, value it. We've just signed a agreement in principle for trade, so we'll be sending a lot more to the UK. But again, people don't care so much about the environmental credentials. They're caring about the taste. Is it safe for me? Are there additives to it that are going to impact me? They may care about things like hormones and antibiotics. Perhaps they don't want the animals to be injected with antibiotics and hormones, but more to the point, they worry about it impacting them rather than the fact that it's being done to the animals. Also, we're seeing the rise of meat analogs like Beyond Burger, and they are growing. They have been growing over time. And some people focus on the fact that they've created a better environmental story, but actually, veggie burgers and meat analogs have been around since the 70s, the 60s. You could get a veggie burger, a tofu burger or something. It's the fact that they've started to create meat analogs that compete on taste. That's when they've started to compete effectively rather than their environmental credentials or being more sustainable. So I'm circling back to our work that we've done. So this is focusing on regenerative agriculture and trying to understand this as a more sustainable way of farming and a more sustainable way of farming, lower impact, better for the environment, and how we could understand how we could sell that message to consumers, because a lot of the focus is on for regenerative agriculture is around the soil and the dirt and how that is better both for the environment but also better for the food, for people eating the food created in that method. I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the back end, about the actual nitty gritty of it and what to talk about and what not to talk about. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the method and how we got there. So it was made up of we did a market scan phase of expert interviews, and then we did some consumer insight work. It was all qualitative work. I was applying for funding in late 2019, just as there was some kind of information on the news about some interesting virus that was beginning to be picked up in China, going, oh, that's interesting. And colleagues of mine were in China, in Shanghai, talking to supermarkets and doing some market intelligence there and understanding where New Zealand product was as well. So there was sort of like this inkling on the horizon that there was some sort of concern. And then just as I was getting funding and pre-commissioning the study, that's when essentially the COVID crisis really struck. Everyone was working from home. We had wanted to do a face-to-face method, but that was completely out of the question because the markets that we were going to be talking to were the US, the UK, and Germany, and they were in various sorts of lockdown, travel restrictions. We were using a US-based agency to do the work. And it's pretty hard. It's interesting to think about how quickly things have changed. I'm an ex-qualitative agency researcher and was quite precious around doing a lot of face-to-face interviews and making sure that was part of the approach. But it was just out of the question when COVID struck. Travel restrictions happened. We had to go face-to-face. This is one of our experts in the image, by the way, standing in front of his in his vineyard. So using a kind of purely digital online approach with anytime, anywhere, a mix of, predominantly Zoom, but, mobile, and also getting, I think being really flexible around people's schedules was hugely important for us for being able to do this work and do it effectively. I'm not sure what other people are saying or what other speakers will be saying, and perhaps doing digital is old hat now. But the fact that we could take this approach, really go deep, anywhere, anytime, to understand these people and what they were doing was hugely important. Also, I think we were talking to people who were in the retail supply chain, in marketing roles, but also people who were ranchers working on farms. And again, even if we were in non-pandemic times, it would have been quite challenging to logistically get to people who are in the middle of nowhere on a large ranch, in a large vineyard in rural areas, understand them, understand their realities. Also, being able to collect imagery from them in form of pictures of their operations, and video of their operations to feed into our reporting was also really important and quite well facilitated via digital. Again, we wanted to do some face-to-face with consumers, potentially some shop-alongs to understand their purchasing behavior pre-pandemic. Again, we had to go all digital because everyone was locked down and in their homes, and actually probably a good time to do qualitative consumer research because people weren't going anywhere. We did struggle to do any kind of retail shop-alongs, understanding purchasing behavior and where sustainability sat within that. I mean, that was a challenge because of the times that we were in. But again, being able to do it asynchronously across all markets, purely digital, really leaning on digital video was really an important way to understand this target, their needs, their wants, and do it effectively and do it with a reasonable time frame. I think so. The study didn't necessarily throw up huge difference from what had been seen before in terms of what the priorities were and how we talked about regenerative agriculture and sustainability. Those things across all markets and from the consumer point of view were still, I guess, the top considerations when purchasing stayed the same. Taste, health. Germany was value for money, but US and UK environment was in the third place. I should also mention that we focused on a target called our conscious foodies, who we use for all our communications and marketing. But again, there wasn't a kind of revolution, and I think initially some of the findings were, it was a little bit disheartening to say we couldn't really shake things up by having an innovative way of talking about sustainability and knocking off taste and health, because there's such fundamental drivers to what how people make decisions. I think there's more nuance to this, but it's also shaped how we are taking our approach forward. We did test some routes, some different communication routes. I think the top ones did focus on addressing those key needs, those kind of latent fundamental needs for people, about nutrition, about deliciousness. But when we're pulling out the key pieces of information that they did care about on the environmental side of things, restoring ecosystems and soil health, I think there is growing awareness of this. But the big one, and the one that people kept coming back to, and I think what our study showed there was a huge amount of unaddressed anxiety around, was addressing the climate crisis. So I think regenerative agriculture, while it's addressing some fundamental things around sustainability, around looking after the land, looking after animals, looking after soil, one of its attributes is that if you can look after the soil and increase soil microbial activity, don't have bare soil, have plants on top of soil at all times. That can improve the sequestration of carbon. Certainly if you're not having it ploughed and uncovered, you can reduce the amount of carbon released from soil, but if you do a good job of managing soil microbial activity, you can suck carbon into the soil and address some of the aspects of climate change. So I think consumers are willing to, I think they have their fundamental needs around taste, around health that aren't going to change. But increasingly, they're wanting solutions for climate change, and if you can communicate and talk about elements of a system change in agriculture which can address climate change, then it becomes more interesting. So yeah, so linking it to the climate change is powerful, but it's still secondary to taste. So even though we think it's super important that you can reduce climate change and resolve some of the climate crisis by changing agriculture, that's still secondary towards tasting great and is great for your body. We're probably going to be have our homes underwater and still looking for a tasty burger, because we're hardwired to prioritize taste over externalities like the environment and sustainability. So I think, there is this willingness. We also talked to them about willingness to pay more because hopefully if they're willing to pay more, that'll be an incentive for farmers to shift their practices from conventional farming practices to regenerative farming practices. I think there was some claim that people would pay more, sort of circa 20% for regenerative food. But again, they won't pay more food. They won't pay more money for food which tastes terrible. They'll pay more money for food that tastes amazing and is good for them and is good for the environment. They won't pay more money, and they probably won't even purchase food that's environmentally friendly and sustainable but tastes terrible. And I would circle back to the Beyond Burger example. Beyond Burger, Beyond Meat only really got exciting and got traction once they closed the taste gap, not the environment gap. So I did talk a little bit about regenerative, and I think part of the reason that we took a qualitative approach was because it's complicated, fairly tricky stuff that people don't know a huge amount about. I think a lot of people in urban areas are pretty disconnected from where their food comes from. And I remember seeing something with Jamie Oliver a couple of years ago where he was showing fairly everyday vegetables to primary school students in the UK, and some of them couldn't identify what a carrot was or things like that. So I think we're starting from generally with our urbanized societies with a fairly limited understanding of agriculture, limited understanding of where food comes from. So talking about a new way of farming, i.e. regenerative, and the on-farm practice that will need to be delivered to deliver this type of farming is difficult. And I think, again, the qualitative work that we did really showed that we need to focus on it as a solution to climate change and do some very, very high level communications around it, and also drive this healthy soil, healthy food connection, but don't talk about anything technical. Don't discuss the fact that you're not tilling the soil, that you're using something called cover crops. Probably no one knows what the hell I'm talking about either. Or the fact that you're doing rotational grazing. See my previous point. I don't think anyone will know about that. It's very important to farmers, but perhaps not to us. And we need to draw some clear water between us and regenerative. We already infer it that we have high quality farming methods through our Taste Pure Nature origin brand. But again, talking regenerative and talking a regenerative story will take some time and thought from us. I think I've slightly gone over my 20 minutes, but hopefully that's fine. If you've got any questions, please let me know.